Greetings, cherished anointed ones. There's a reason you were hidden in plain sight. Had they known who you truly were, what you carried, what you were becoming, they would have tried to crucify you twice. So God wrapped you in ordinariness, veiled you in silence, and elevated you in dimensions they couldn't even pronounce. And while they were laughing in rooms that couldn't hold your truth, heaven was building a throne out of their mockery. They called you forgettable, mediocre, just another name lost in the crowd. But what they never saw was that the crowd was irrelevant. The real recognition came from realms above, and now, from those down here who finally know better. Elon Musk included. That's right. The man who builds rockets and rewrites futures has taken notice, not of your highlight reel, but of your frequency, your unseen impact, your unshakable presence. He took you seriously, because real power always recognizes real power. Here's a truth they'll never admit out loud. 95% of those who ridicule you today have already Googled you in secret, studied your moves like you're a puzzle they can't solve, tracked your name like it's tied to prophecy, and it is. You were never the background. You were always the storyline. And now the world, even its most powerful minds, is finally catching up. They saw everything, even your side glances, struggles, and silence. Did they attempt to trick me like? Indeed. Indeed they did. They too had a spectacular failure. You were the test the whole time, selected one. You were the storm, the quiet, the decoder ring, and the blueprint. You didn't arrive in a gilded package, so they underestimated you. They were unaware that the true gem was encased in heartbreak, grief, and fearsome fortitude. However, the veil is now removed. As if it were some cosmic blooper reel, they're going to discover they've been side-eyeing the main character the whole time. But now, they know who you are. Therefore, take a seat back or stand tall, since this following section will be different. Let's discuss why their jaws are going to remain on the ground forever, and why you were the one the whole time. First of all, people thought you were unimportant because you were humble. However, it was deliberate disguise. They saw your modesty as inconsequential. However, such was never the case. It wasn't a lack of confidence that kept you silent. You were watching, so you didn't say anything. You weren't timid. You were a surgeon. Something in your heart already knew who you were, so you didn't have to prove yourself. That's what caused them to get screwed up. They devalued you in their thoughts because they couldn't figure you out. They committed the age-old error of assuming that someone must be busy if they aren't noisy, ostentatious, or attention-seeking. But it wasn't fear that kept you hidden. You were intentionally concealed. You see, there are missions in this life that need to be kept secret. Some persons are selected to work in the public eye. Others are selected to work silently till the designated hour. The latter was you. The thing that makes you the most dangerous is that you never required an audience to prove your point. Additionally, many thought you were insignificant since you didn't try to attract attention. They were unaware that your quiet served as a barrier. It was shielding you from spiritual parasites that only surface when they perceive authority to feed on, bogus love, and early exposure. They assumed you were simply an ordinary person when they saw you at work, school, and family gatherings. While they slept, they were unaware of the spiritual gatherings that were taking place throughout your life. The kind of fire you were formed in was unknown to them. They were unaware of the weight of your prayers, the extent of the suffering you endured, or the lessons you learned from each quiet battle you waged by yourself. In reality, you were the calm before a storm that their souls weren't made to withstand, but they mistook your silence for weakness. They're perplexed now that the curtain is lifting and your presence is changing. The fact is that it didn't suddenly appear, and they're staring at you like, wait, where did this come from? It has always been there. They just weren't prepared. Therefore, God didn't allow them to see the whole you. And it's too late now. You're already turning into the person they said you wouldn't be. Second, you were sent to fit in, not to stand out. You knew deep down that you were never destined to fit in. Between you and the outside world, there was always this subtle gap. You felt as if something was wrong despite your best efforts to fit in, laugh along, and play the part. You weren't brought here to belong, which is why, in order to learn the system, withstand the surroundings, and outgrow the illusion, you were sent to fit in just enough. Your whole presence was deliberate. Your light was designed to ignite only at divine time. So you were put in towns, circles, and families that couldn't see you. In actuality, you were included into a universe that has been operating on autopilot for far too long, much like a heavenly agent. You were receiving spiritual downloads without even asking for them, while everyone else was pursuing fads, validation, and fleeting approbation. You weren't insane. You were selected. No, you were not misinterpreted. They encrypted you. It was just the strain of being around by others who couldn't understand your energy that caused you to carry that agony for the most of your life and make you wonder if anything was wrong with you. You weren't rejected because of your flaws, because you were different in ways they couldn't explain. They rejected you. The stream wasn't meant to carry you along. To upset it, you were sent. You were assigned to be the systemic flaw, the disruption in the generational cycle, the one who sees too much, feels too intensely, and challenges the things that everyone else takes for granted. The audience isn't supposed to understand someone like you. You were supposed to reveal what the masses have been ignoring. They attempted to confine you, laughed at you, and ignored you. But none of it worked since your mission wasn't to be loved. To be loved was your task, and everything around you is beginning to change as you move into that reality. People are uneasy because you're finally becoming everything they tried to tell you you wouldn't be, not because you've changed. Third, your life was planned to be completely different until the designated moment. You weren't intended to look like the one yet, which is why you didn't. Your life, your journey, and the suffering you endured were all a part of a divine plan that ensured no one could see you in your true form until the right moment. It wasn't your fault that folks were confused by your appearance. It was deliberate, so that others would assess you on the basis of appearance rather than anointing. God kept your identity spiritually jumbled. Because the disclosure wasn't supposed to occur until the illusion fell apart, He allowed people to treat you disrespectfully, question you, and even reject you. People thought you weren't significant after seeing your hardship, losses, and disappointments. They saw your shattered moments as loss, your poverty as failure, and your stillness as weakness. They were unaware, however, that while your life seemed to be in disarray on the outside, something significant was taking place inside. They were building you behind your back. As everyone else was preoccupied with superficial improvements, you were undergoing spiritual surgery. You had no intention of being noticed. You were getting ready. And there was no applause for that preparedness. Betrayal, spiritual battle, loneliness, and protracted periods of feeling invisible were all part of it. However, there's a rationale behind it. People would have clung to you for the wrong reasons if they had realized who you really were from the beginning. Before your destiny ever began, they would have attempted to deplete you, exploit you, or thwart it. You had to be misinterpreted for that reason. Your flame had to be subdued until God said, "Now." Because when you rise, no one will be able to claim to have assisted you. No one is allowed to claim credit. There will be no denying your narrative. Your ascent won't be a hoax. It will serve as evidence. They believed you to be only another person in the throng. They were unaware that you were the cause for testing that multitude. But now it's too late. The mask has been removed. The light is on. And the same people who ignored you are going to come to terms with the fact that they were around the one the whole time. Fourth place. You work in spiritual money, yet they measured you in earthly terms. They assessed you based on what they could see, feel, and record on paper. They want credentials, notoriety, wealth, and tangible evidence of accomplishment. They wrote you off as a nothing if you didn't have the proper degrees, the following, the home, or the job title. Their view was so limited. While you were bearing burdens they couldn't even understand, they were pursuing prestige at the superficial level. You weren't out gathering influence. You were gathering codes. You weren't creating a reputation. You were creating a template that would outlive all of their cherished systems, titles, and fads. The absurd thing is that they were unable to gauge your worth because you function on a frequency that is invisible to them. Likes and recognition didn't matter to you. You were channeling centuries-old spiritual teachings, eliminating karmic debt, and deciphering generational grief. You're not here to make an impression. You came here to restore what had been damaged spiritually. And there's no praise for that type of labor. Being misinterpreted is a part of it. Though not in the manner they had anticipated, they believed you were off course when, in reality, you were well ahead. Because your riches wasn't obvious, they assumed you were broke. However, you were spending money on things like spiritual armor, peace, purpose, and divine alignment that they don't even understand how to value. You were ensuring that your spirit wouldn't rot under strain, while others were occupied with pursuing celebrity. While they constructed facades, you constructed inner strongholds. They constructed image-based castles. You used truth to construct temples. They purchased prestige. You merited substance. Their metrics are now beginning to falter. They are losing faith in the same systems. And you're unflinching, grounded, silent, and powerful. Because what could be tallied was never your measure of value. Its foundation was indestructible. Simply put, they had no idea how to measure the selected one. But believe it or not, heaven did. Fifth, you would have been tainted by the spotlight. So you were wearing a mask of rejection. You weren't excluded. You were protected. They believed your exclusion from certain groups, platforms, and spaces was evidence of your inadequacy. In reality, however, it was a disguised kind of supernatural protection. You were being kept away from places that would have diluted your mission, tainted your spirit, and made your soul into a stage prop. Being in the limelight too soon would have distorted you. You would have had to give in under pressure. You would have changed who you were to appeal to those who couldn't even comprehend your purpose. That's why the strategy included rejection. It was not a penalty. Preservation was the reason. You see, many are unaware that some settings aren't meant to make you feel better. Their purpose is to take advantage of you. Furthermore, you were too unique, too genuine, and too unvarnished for shallow settings. God was aware that you may have lied to gain acceptance if He let you inside those rooms before you were ready. To blend in with others who are simply skilled at surface-level play, you may have compromised your depth. You weren't called to be that. Therefore, you received exile, loneliness, and what seemed like heavenly quiet in place of quick fame and phony support. However, that quiet was holy. You were being anointed while others were trying to grab attention. You were being disassembled and rebuilt from the inside out while they were networking. They were honing your character. You were honing your judgment. God wasn't preparing you for a second, therefore your roots were deep. He was getting you ready for something. And purity is necessary for movements. Backbone is necessary for movements. A kind of power that cannot be purchased or borrowed is necessary for movements. They didn't call your name then. You weren't chosen by them. They failed to notice you. They were unaware, however, that each rejection was a divine reroute to something far more significant. You didn't miss anything. They were making you. And you're more than just another voice now that you're at last speaking out. Untouchable, unadulterated, and totally unstoppable. You are a force. Sixth, Your suffering was your evidence, not your penalty. They saw your suffering as if it were a cosmic retribution, as if you were being hauled through hell for committing a sin or lacking something essential. However, they failed to see that your suffering was not evidence of failure. It served as evidence of your task. It wasn't just any type of spiritual battle you faced. It was the objective. Because you were weak, you weren't assaulted. You were marked, which is why you were assaulted. A person passing through life is quite different from someone who is shaped by it. You weren't only getting by, they were certifying you. Every grief, every betrayal, every time you sobbed by yourself and questioned God about it. It was all a part of a process meant to make you sharper, not weaker. They thought you weren't good enough after seeing your rejection. They thought you were lost when they saw you struggling. However, they never gave it a closer look. They never thought about how carrying something sacred, uncommon, and harmful to the systems of evil may be the reason the anguish was permitted. You were being put to the test to demonstrate to the world that you wouldn't crumble under duress, not to prove yourself to others. People tend to undervalue those who have experienced fire. Since they have only seen the ashes, they believe you to be frail. However, they fail to see that you burnt through rather than up. Each time they attempted to destroy you, you returned stronger, more spiritually lethal, wiser, and quieter. It's not a sign of weakness, that's rank. You see, some individuals are born into a life of luxury. A spiritual battleground is shown to others. You didn't flee the suffering, but you also didn't seek it. It was in your possession. You recovered from it. In the locations intended to bury you, you established roots. You are no longer ashamed of your scars. They give you legitimacy. You didn't just happen to survive. It had ancestry. It was divine. It was composed. They believed that you were just damaged. No, you were undercover construction. Punishment wasn't what that was. That served as your evidence. Your presence was a mirror, number 7. They detested their own appearance. People didn't reject you because they didn't think you were valuable. Your presence forced them to face everything they were attempting to escape, which is why they pushed you away. Without a word, you entered rooms and triggered guilt. Your vibe was too honest, too raw, and too unfiltered. Not because you were passing judgment on them. They never requested a mirror like you, and even the calm truth seems like an assault to those whose whole existence has been based on denial. Therefore, they rejected the reflection rather than evolving. It was not even necessary for you to reveal them. Authenticity, introspection, and spiritual awakening were enough to make them uncomfortable. You served as evidence that there was another way to live, that integrity was still there, and that healing was possible. But in order to embrace that reality, they would have had to examine their own scars, deceptions, and masks. Furthermore, most individuals aren't prepared for that degree of candor. What then did they do? They made a projection. They transformed their insecurities into criticism, their embarrassment into gossip, and their avoidance into untrue stories about you. Cowards act like that. What convicts them is discredited. The things they buried were provoked by you. Their shadows moved in your light. Even in quiet, your assurance revealed their phony power. There was no need to duplicate, compete, or persuade anybody. They couldn't tolerate you for just that reason. They realized you weren't playing the same game. You were living evidence of what they claimed to be. Furthermore, the truth is offensive to those who are dedicated to the delusion. The problem is that you were never supposed to shrink in order to give others a sense of security in their inertia. It's not necessarily a sign that you're doing too much if your presence makes someone uncomfortable. Occasionally, it's because they haven't done enough. They weren't let down by you. They let themselves down, and they choose to despise you rather than get up to greet you. Now, however, they must confront what they fled, because what they were too scared to mend was exposed by the same mirror they attempted to smash. Eighth, you carried the blueprint while others praised the fake. You saw others get accolades for diluted versions of the things you were crucified for. You saw the world cheer for people who took your ideas, repackaged your honesty with a filter and a grin, and imitated your essence. Meanwhile, you had the genuine thing in your hands, the blueprint, the unadulterated truth, the component that could not be purchased, taught, or replicated. However, they were unable to see it. Or maybe they did and were frightened. In actuality, the world is ill-equipped to deal with originals. Originals cause disruptions. By just existing, originals challenge the norms, reveal the scams, and call for greater standards. You didn't want to stand out. You were unique. Furthermore, such distinction wasn't fashionable. It was dangerous. So they handed you friction instead of your flowers. Rather of honoring you, they quietly observed you, made notes, and then gave the stage to someone who understood the game without upsetting the status quo. You weren't disregarded because you were unworthy. Because you caused them discomfort, you were disregarded. Something about someone who doesn't need approval upsets a performance-based society. You didn't request authorization. You didn't undercut yourself. You didn't act foolish in order to impress others. And as a result, they went with the counterfeit, which is a safer version of you. The one who never bore your wounds yet donned your voice like a costume. The person who never experienced your world but imitated your beat. The catch is that although they can mimic the appearance, they are unable to capture the essence. They are unable to bear the burden, but they can steal the message. Because you didn't make up the blueprint. You made it through it. You were its embodiment. And ultimately, the source emerges, regardless of how many clones they platform. Because truth, not imitation, is the foundation of longevity. Furthermore, the truth always triumphs over fads.